Hi, everyone, and welcome to the meeting. It's 7:30, and I am Stephanie Morris. I'm here to present tonight, and I'm going to go ahead and get started. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the profile of a garden, Martial Cottle Park, and it's myself and Ann Finney who will be giving the presentation tonight. So welcome. If you'd like to go ahead and enter the chat how you heard about the meeting and where you're from, you're more than welcome to do so. I'm going to show some brief introduction slides about the California Native Plant Society, and then I will move on into tonight's presentation. First, I'd like to acknowledge that work done by the Santa Clara Valley chapter of CNPS, the California Native Plant Society, lies in the homeland of the Muwekma Ohlone, the Ama Mutsun tribal band, the Tamyan Nation, and the Ramaytush Ohlone. This land was theirs for thousands of years and was taken forcibly from them. Despite 2 centuries of oppression and genocide, they still live and thrive in this area today. We acknowledge and respect them for their land stewardship, culture, language, and humanity. The Santa Clara Valley chapter of CNPS hopes to learn from them and support their work to restore traditional practices and heal from historical trauma. Welcome to the meeting. If this is your first talk, we would love to know how you found out about us and where you're located. So please put that in the chat if you'd like. The chat is a button which will either appear on the bottom or top of your screen. Tonight's team, I'm going to be hosting. I'm Stephanie Morris. We have a question and answer moderator, and that is Madeline Morrow. We have a YouTube moderator and a tech, and that is Vivian New. And the speakers tonight will be myself and Ann Finney. I am going to give most of the presentation along with some audio that I pre-recorded of Ann answering some different questions that I have. And then at the end, Ann will be available for question and answers, as will I. CNPS is a nonprofit environmental organization that was founded in 1965. We have over 10,000 members in 35 chapters, and we're spread all over California as well as parts of Baja California. The Santa Clara Valley chapter covers the Santa Clara and the southern San Mateo counties. The CNPS mission is to save California's native plants and habitats by bringing together science, education, conservation, and gardening to power the native plant movement. We welcome your support of this movement to conserve California's native plant diversity. You can join our chapter of CNPS. Membership benefits include 2 journals called Artemisia and Flora, and also the Blazing Star chapter newsletter, which is sent out once about every 2 months and includes discounts to local nurseries and more as part of your membership. The Blazing Star will have information about talks such as this and hikes and other events. The information of how to join is here, cnps.org/join. And you'll find that if you go to CNPS-SCV for Santa Clara Valley chapter, so at cnps-scv.org, we will have all sorts of information about gardening with native plants and these talks and all sorts of events. Some of our upcoming events include on January 19th, a talk about treasure hunting after the 2020 fires with Amy Patton. We are also going to have our Native Plant Lecture Series committee meeting on Monday, January 31st at 7:30. That's those of us who work to do these meetings. We get together and plan. If you have ideas about what talks you'd like to hear, you can share those with us, and we'll get together and plan our next series of talks. We also have a talk about picking plants for your garden using the Calscape website. That's going to be February 2nd at 7:30 p.m. And another great talk is going to be all of our favorite native plant books and resources, and that will be February 9th. You can find out more about all these on our website as well. The nursery, organized by our chapter, is going to be open through Friday, January 14th. And it will reopen in February. So we're going to be open until Friday, closed for a little bit, and then reopened in February. You can order plants on the website, and you can have them delivered if you're located within the delivery zone, or you can pick them up at the nursery. And the nursery is our biggest revenue generating source for the chapter. So it's a great way to support the chapter, support native plants, and also get something great for your garden. We also sell t-shirts, books, and more. And there are continual plants being added to the inventory by our very, very hardworking staff. So much appreciated for those who work at the nursery. Please stay in touch. You can get timely updates and late-breaking announcements about meetings and other events by joining our news mailing list. And here is the information here, CNPS-SCV news mailing list is here down here at the bottom, CNPS-SCV-news plus subscribe at googlegroups.com. We will have somebody put this in the chat so that you don't have to go back and write all this down. We actually have a horticultural scholarship available right now too, and the applications are due by January 31st, 2022. And it supports a local student pursuing a horticultural career with a focus on California native plants. The scholarship amount is $750. So if you or yourself knows anybody who could apply for this, please share the information with them. A little bit of quick housekeeping before we start the talk. Please keep your microphone on mute. And if you have questions for the speakers, please type them into the chat box at any time during the presentation. Our Q&A moderator will keep track of them and answer and read them to us after the talk. We expect to finish the talk at around 9 p.m. And we're also showing this program simultaneously on YouTube, where it will be available afterward as a recording that you can watch and share with others. So once again, tonight's speaker is myself and also Anne Finney. This is a picture of Anne. And the garden we're going to be talking about is the Martial Cottle native plant garden. I won't go into any long introduction other than to just state this right here because I'll go into more detail during the talk. So I'm going to unshare these introductory slides and share my presentation here. Okay, I think we're good to go. So tonight's presentation is going to be about the Master Gardener's native plant demonstration at Martial Cottle Park. I got very inspired to visit this garden because we had a in-person tour that I wasn't able to attend in October. And I thought, well, it would sure be great for people like me to be able to see this garden and then to have a record of it online so that other people could see this garden anytime they wanted to. And at the same time, we started talking amongst ourselves and thinking, how neat would it be to start understanding what's the life of a volunteer like? You know, we have so many great volunteers with our chapter, with Master Gardeners, and what types of things do they do? And so I thought, let's profile a volunteer. I contacted Anne Finney, and she was gracious enough to say, yes, she would go ahead and let me come and interview her in the garden. And she was extremely enthusiastic about it. So that's where this talk came about. This is a plan view of the garden that I pulled off Google Maps. The garden itself is 4 acres of testing and trial beds. And it's down here toward the bottom middle of this map. This whole entire area is all of Martial Cottle Park. It's a fantastic place to go and ride your bike and go for a very long walk. There are farms that are actively working. And this is a 4-acre portion of Martial Cottle Park. It was established in 2014 and 2015 as a demonstration garden by the UC Master Gardeners. And this plot contains native plant gardens, fruit trees, vegetable gardens, pollinator gardens, a greenhouse, and a teaching pavilion. It's really a fantastic zone of all these different things happening. There are ways to visit this garden on your own. You can go in person every 3rd Saturday from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. And the Master Gardeners also have work days that are Tuesdays from 9 to 12 and also 1 to 4. And you can go Wednesdays and Fridays and Saturdays also from 9 a.m. to noon. The native plant work days specific to the native plant garden are Tuesdays from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. So as part of the profile of a volunteer with Anne, I asked her several different questions. So as I go through the talk tonight, I'm going to share these questions with the purple bars on the top that have answers from Anne that she recorded and I've included in the presentation. And then interspersed between that, I'm going to share photos of plants from the garden. So a brief overview of Anne. She began volunteering in May of 2019, and she had gone to some CNPS talks on native plants and then met Nella Henninger. So first she met Arvin through a talk, and then she met Nella Henninger, both people who are very active with CNPS. And she introduced Anne to this native plant demonstration garden because Nella is also active with the Master Gardeners. So Anne typically volunteers right now about 30 or 35 hours per month at the Martial Cottle Garden. And I'm going to play a recording. It's about 2 minutes long that Anne gave me about herself.
Hi, my name is Anne Finney, and I am a Master Gardener volunteer. I've been volunteering since 2019 and absolutely love to volunteer with the UC Master Gardeners. Our mission is to provide science-based knowledge to the public, to students of all ages, from wee little ones all the way up to folks who've been gardening for 80 years or more. So I am a volunteer at Martial Cottle Park, and my passion is California native plants and sustainability. So there are 3 gardens at the entrance of our demonstration garden there at Martial Cottle Park, which I help to maintain along with a small group of master gardeners and members of the public. So I volunteer because it is really a lot of fun. I retired from pharmacy in 2015 and thought this would be a great way to spend my time making a little bit of a difference in the world. I'm really passionate about being sustainable, using water wisely, and sharing my knowledge and love of gardening with the public. So for me, it's super fun. It's social. I can be outside in a safe way during COVID times, and I can feel good about being outdoors and being with like-minded people who are ready to learn. So that's why I volunteer, and I find that it gives me back so much more than I give, because I just have a great time with it.
Okay, so I'm going to show some pictures of the garden now. This is what you would see if you walked up toward the entrance gate of the garden. And to the left is the area called the Habitat Haven. Kind of right in the front, there's a mound that's called Pollinator Hill. And then over to the right is the area called California Native Garden. And all these areas have mostly native plants. Some of them are 100% native plants. So I'm going to show one by one the different areas of this garden. You can see this picture was taken in spring because the poppies are blooming profusely. This is a plan of the garden. And so when you arrive, you can see that the street parking would be kind of down below on this map. You walk up a little road, and then the gate where it shows this number 1 here, that's where the picture I just shared was, where you're looking through at this main path, and the gardens that are the native gardens are kind of right up there in that zone. And then you can wander through and see all the vegetable gardens and the orchard and all the other areas. It's a wealth of different types of things. So Pollinator Hill is that area in the middle, and it was designed by Aggie Kehoe, who's also very active with the Native Plant Society and does design and maintenance. It was planted in 2016, and it is 100% California native plants. It was designed, but like many gardens, it does change and evolve over time. And so some of the additions that have been made in recent years include a new buckeye that was planted from seed, Ceanothus Ray Hartman, some coffeeberry, and some Baccharis Twin Peaks 2, the ground cover coyote bush, and also some ground cover manzanitas. And part of this garden was funded through a grant that came through the Happy Hollow Foundation as well. The garden has some fantastic signage, and these gardens are informational as well as colorful and have some great pictures on them. The signs were developed as part of a grant from the Open Space Authority and Measure Q funding, and they were designed by a company called Pulse Design. So this one's just a basic overview of pollinators. And then we see the garden in spring, where we have the Phacelia just really growing and filling in a large area of the garden here, as well as the California poppies. And you can see this picture here with the close-up of the native bee. I wanted to mention a few things about the photography in tonight's talk before we go too much further. Most of the more beautiful pictures in this talk were taken by Henry or Hank Morales, who is another volunteer at this garden. And he generously allowed me to include his photos in this talk because he has so many that he took in springtime of various years and throughout the seasons, as well as some fantastic wildlife photos that I'll be sharing tonight as well. So thank you so much to Hank for sharing his beautiful photos, which really is going to make the talk come much more alive. We also have California poppies, and you can see this beautiful close-up of the bee coming in to pollinate the California poppy, our state flower blooming in the spring through the late spring. And we're going to talk a little bit more about native bees. We have an entire presentation just about native bees if you're interested. It's on the CNPS YouTube channel, but they are very important pollinators because they can spread more pollen than honeybees in general. This is a bee house that is at Pollinator Hill at the UC Master Gardeners demonstration garden here. This was designed and created by Cynthia Butler, who's a master gardener. The hollow stems are from cuttings of Salvia apiana, the native salvia, and also some non-native verbena. So the idea here is that bees can actually go and nest in these hollow cavities. And native bees also nest in the ground or in tubular tunnels of all types or in cavities in wood. So this is a way to use products from on site to create a habitat for bees. This little thing poking up here behind the bee house is a little bit of a desert willow as well. Here's one of our smaller native plants that is growing really well in this garden and is a profuse spring bloomer. It's also a great plant for kind of a smaller size garden. So you'll see things here that are for small gardens as well as really huge gardens. And it's a great perennial for spring color that attracts bees and hummingbirds and is a pretty good plant to put on a slightly elevated mound or raised up a little bit out of the soil because it likes really good drainage. It's called Penstemon Margarita Bop. One thing I asked Anne early on was what her main volunteer activities are. And so she shared this audio file with me, and I'll go ahead and play that and you can read what she wrote alongside it as well. It's about 3 minutes long.
I spend most Tuesday mornings making sure that things are looking good in the demonstration gardens. We have plenty to do. There's always maintenance. There's always something with irrigation. We have critters that we fight, so we make sure that things are protected against rabbits and gophers and such. So there's always some maintenance. There's always replacement of plants that have been eaten by the rabbits. There's always pruning to do. So there's plenty of work in the gardens. We have a lot of fun doing it. I wouldn't call it work per se, because I just love to do it. And to me, it's fun. So my number one responsibility to go out there and have fun and doing it with people that I enjoy being with. We have a small crew of people who come out, both volunteers from the community as well as other master gardeners. and we just have a nice time. It's a social activity as well as an activity where we learn. We come across things all the time that are new to us and that we learn from. And so that's one of the best things about being a volunteer. But I'd say my number one responsibility is to make sure that I share what I'm learning with members of the public. So as a UC Master Gardener volunteer, we have an arrangement with the University of California to share what we learn. That's the whole reason why they train us. And I love to talk to people. I love to teach. So every year I give at least 2 talks. And when I give a talk, it focuses about sustainability. It focuses on using native plants, things that are water-wise, things that are good for the environment, no using of pesticides. I talk about Doug Tallamy's work. So all of these things that we do in our gardens try to follow the principles that are taught with the California Native Plant Society, with sustainable practices. And I'd say that, that's my most important thing that I do, is to share the word with people of all ages, from our school field trips to the university students to adults who have been gardening for many years. So I try to be able to talk about every aspect for all ages.
And I'll be speaking a little bit about this beautiful teaching pavilion that we see pictured here. You can see Anne giving one of her presentations from last summer. So I'll speak in a little bit about more information about this teaching pavilion. So here's another presentation that Anne gave. Her talks last year were about how to have a lush waterwise landscape. And her second talk was about best practices for growing wildflowers at home. And you can see this large barrel behind Anne. That is actually a rainwater collection system. And I will share a little bit more about that in a minute. So some of her talks are given in the pavilion, and then she'll lead walks around the garden so that she can point out different plants and people can ask questions, and they can really see how plants interact with each other and learn more about successes and challenges in the garden. So one plant that is featured prominently in the garden is the Cleveland sage. It blooms from spring until summer, and it attracts hummingbirds, honeybees, and songbirds. It's really a magnet for all different types of habitat. You can see the close-up here in the photo that Hank took of the bee going in and getting itself right down into the flower there. And it's a great plant to talk about maintenance too as well, because it really has its season when it blooms, and then it needs to be pruned and shaped. And when I was there right before it got pruned and right afterward. And I was able to see how Anne had worked with the wood and the flowers, and what she decided to do with pruning it, and how she decided to leave it natural afterward. Another really great native plant that's in Pollinator Hill, the main area here in the middle, is the California buckwheat. This is our local buckwheat. You can see it hiking, especially in the East Bay and our hillsides. Blooms from summer into fall, and it attracts a wide variety of insect pollinators. And by planting plants like the buckwheat, the local natives in our gardens, we really can create an urban habitat network. So part of this demonstration garden is to really show people, this is how the plant looks, this is how big it gets, this is what it grows next to. You can do this in your garden too. And you have people there like Anne who are doing this hands-on and can really have the experience to say what works and what doesn't work. And it's just a fantastic resource. Another great plant that I was able to see in fall when I visited the garden in October was the California goldenrod. It was in full bloom. I got down really low to take this picture. This plant is probably only about 18 inches high and pairs beautifully with the California fuchsia, which attracts hummingbirds. Here's another picture of the California fuchsia. This is our low-growing California fuchsia, one of many varieties that exist, and it's called Select Matole. And then we also have some taller California fuchsias. and they grow with more arching stems. And what's beautiful about these is you can look up through them and you can see the sky and the blue and the orange, red, and the contrast is just really striking. And these are just complete hummingbird magnets. They provide just a great food and a lot of activity with the hummingbirds. And these plants get pruned down after they finish blooming, which is generally at the very, very end of our hot summer fall time. So around November, December is when they would get pruned down. So I visited the garden first in October when I took these pictures, and then later in December. And here's Anne, she's now cutting down that California fuchsia, gathering it up, and then preparing to let the plant rejuvenate. And with the rains, it'll start pushing up new foliage and it will start blooming again next summer. So this is all about garden maintenance. And what Anne told me was that she co-leads a small team of volunteers with Allie Judy, who's also a master gardener. And they basically maintain and water and plant as the season dictates. They also do some plant replacing, and I'll show you a little bit about that in a minute. One thing that I saw Anne doing after we got our first nice flush of rain in the fall was starting to weed wildflowers around. This is a coffee berry, because if we let the wildflowers grow too close to the smaller shrub, they may start to overtake it. So she's pulling some of the annuals away from the base. And then she was just gently spreading those pulled wildflowers kind of right at the base of the coffee berry. And here's a coyote mint, which is another one of our local natives. On the right-hand side, it's what it looks like when it's just pruned. And on the left-hand side, you can see what it looks like when it's in flower, which is generally spring into summer. The pruning is usually done at the end of the summer. And this plant is got a really nice minty fragrance. It's another one of the small plants that does well in kind of a smaller, more tame garden. And it's a great butterfly plant as well. And one of the showpieces in the pollinator garden is the California lilac, the Ceanothus Ray Hartman. This plant is a very fast growing plant that can be trained as a big shrub, or you can even prune it up and let its bottom branches show a little bit and kind of train it into a tree. When these bloom, they typically will bloom at the same time that poppies bloom. So you'll see the different color contrast together with the orange and the blue, and it's pretty stunning. And Ceanothus are one of our top pollinator plants. Great habitat plant. So the next area of the garden I'm going to talk about is called the Habitat Haven, and you can kind of see it off to the left side here in this picture. This garden was designed by Cynthia Butler, and it was also planted in 2016. It's about 85% native plants, and about 15% of it is Mediterranean species. And those were included for a little bit more variety of summer blooms during the time when a lot of our natives tend to be a little more dormant. This is a rosy buckwheat, the Eriogonum grande variety rubescens. It's a summer blooming buckwheat originating from the Channel Islands, and seeds readily, as you can see, to form new plants and kind of filling in this whole space. But makes a really showy area right here in front of the sign. And you'll find sometimes that this has a deep rosy color, but it can also have kind of a lighter pink color as well. So this would be a plant that you let flower and then prune back the spent flower buds, and sometimes take it where it's gone a little bit too much into an area and replant and reposition and adjust as time goes on. We also have the buckbrush, which is a local native. It's the Ceanothus cuneatus. It has a white flower, which is a little unusual for some of the Ceanothus. So it kind of is a showy surprise. And this is something you can see while you're hiking in our local foothills. So it's wonderful to see what happens when we grow this plant in the garden, and how does it work with the garden as we create our own version of nature in a different space here. So this plant's doing really well, thriving in the garden. One of the showpieces of this part of the garden is the elderberry. It's a very fast growing tree, and it definitely needs shaping. We've got to keep on top of it to make sure that elderberries maintain their nice structure. So Anne and her crew are doing a lot of shaping on this, usually once every year or couple years. It's an anchor, not only because of its form and its height, but also because it's a complete bird magnet. It's a fantastic habitat plant for birds, because it produces flowers and it also produces berries. And it produces plenty of space for birds to perch and move around. And then additionally, it allows for habitat in the trunks and the roots, because ground squirrels and rabbits and skunks can make their home, and they're churning around down there in the roots, but this is a vigorous plant and it doesn't mind. It just keeps growing. It can survive all that. And here you'll see a little bit of a water feature, which I'll show you a close-up of. This water feature was designed and created by Cynthia Butler, and it's a completely custom design because she took a gigantic squash leaf and then put the concrete on top of the squash leaf to form this basin. And you can see the veins here in the squash leaf in the imprint. So as you look close, you can see the detail. But it's also extremely practical because that gently sloping base allows for a deeper area in the middle and a very, very shallow area on the side. So not only will it support birds, but it will also support bees and butterflies who don't want to have deep water. And when I was here in December, there were tons and tons of birds that came and flocked into it. And I was trying to take good video to show here, but my camera wasn't adequate enough to show good video, but it was really amazing and fun. And Hank caught this beautiful picture of the bird actually going to get some water right from the dripper. This is a picture, both of these pictures Hank took during these recent winter days. The bottom one actually is a picture looking inside this fountain when it was iced over in the morning, and you can see a droplet of water coming down. The droplet has kept the water from freezing in that zone, and he actually caught the drop mid-splash. So there's still active moving water for habitat even in the icy mornings. And then we also have this beautiful dune tansy picture, which shows what the ice has done when it crystallized on the leaves of this tansy. And it's a very chilly little zone because it's a flat space down in South San Jose with hills all around it. And the cool air actually rolls off the surrounding hills and then kind of collects down in this low area where the demonstration garden exists. And so they get much cooler temperatures, for example, than I do in Campbell, where I'm a little closer to the bay. So this is right beside the elderberry, off to the side a little bit. It's called the salt bush, and it has also made a great habitat plant. It attracts rabbits, skunks, and ground squirrels. They can all take cover under this bush. And Anne has noticed that birds will nip at the new growth, and the fact that they're doing this constantly is basically keeping the bush kind of gently pruned. There's been no actual pruning on this shrub. It's just kind of been left to its own devices, and it's been shaped by the wildlife and habitat there around it. But it's a very easy care plant, hasn't needed much water or tending. So I asked Anne, what are some of the biggest challenges in the garden? What are the things that stump you? And here's what she said. I'll go ahead and play her audio. It's about 3 minutes long.
These gardens have been really successful in providing habitat for our fauna. We have so many birds, we have lizards, we have pollinators galore. We have so much activity that it's just a pleasure just to be still and to watch what's going on in the gardens. So that's one of the most wonderful things. But because they're such wonderful habitat and they give shelter and they draw in our fauna, we do have some challenges because of that. We have ground squirrels, we have rabbits, we have gophers, we have skunks and possums that frequent the gardens, and we tend to get root damage done by the gophers and ground squirrels. Sometimes we'll lose entire shrubs because they've eaten the roots. I've walked in and found shrubs on their side, having been blown over by the winds because their root, barely hanging on by one root because the rest of the roots have been eaten. So we do have some of that. You just plan for loss. You plant to replace things. We have used gopher baskets. In this picture here, I do see some gopher baskets that are successfully being used to protect the roots, but the tops of the plants had been eaten by rabbits. So in the foreground was seaside daisy, and you can see the soil disturbance done by either ground squirrels or gophers, and then the tops, the rabbits were there. And so we find that the damage is worse in the wintertime because some of the other plots on the property are not as full with other plants in the test gardens. So the critters are coming over to the native gardens to have their lunch there. So those, I'd say, were some of our biggest challenges. And there's pros and cons to using the gopher baskets. They do protect the roots, but you can get some plants where their roots are girdled. So that will ultimately restrict the growth of the plant and potentially kill it down the road. So pros and cons, you just plan for loss and replace as needed, and do the best you can. But I'd so much rather have the wildlife there and replace the plant than not have the wildlife. So that's one of the things that you just deal with.
And one of the other things we talked about with this specific picture here, why I included it, is that this area is right in the middle of the garden in the hot sun. And so this being kind of an area of San Jose that does get colder and does get quite hot as well, they're finding that they struggle with a lot of the coastal plants because, they can put a plant that says maybe it will take full sun, but here the full sun is just hot. And so there's a lot of experimentation of, well, let's try this variety of ground cover manzanita and see how it works. And then that information can get shared with people. Wow, this one, maybe Pacific Mist ground cover manzanita is starting to do really well here. Let's plant some more of that. It can take a little more heat than some of the others. Interesting. So it's, fun to kind of do trial and error and be able to share that information. This was the December visit, and I was walking around with Anne, and she pointed out here the stubby growth on these little ceanothus trying to get going, the rabbits just nibbling it down. And so she eventually decided to go ahead and just put a little cage around the top of them so that they could get growing a little bit larger before the rabbits came back and just completely ate them down to the nubs. This area of the garden is called the California Native Garden, even though all the areas have native plants. This is its official designation. So this is as you come in, it's all the right side of the garden. And this garden was basically designed to showcase plants that are more maintained, not quite as wild, things that you could use in an urban or a suburban garden. And this part here in the picture is on a gridded drip system. And the other portion, which is kind of in the back of this that I'll show in a little bit, focuses on large California native plants that are hand watered as needed. So this garden's all 100% native plants, also established in 2016, and was designed by several master gardeners, including Allie Judy. You can see some redbud in here with the pink flowers, a dendromecon, a bush poppy, some silver bush lupin, poppies, and I'll show some other things as well. There's some beautiful signage in this garden as well, basically pointing out general overview of landscaping with California native plants, showing how our California floristic province kind of extends down into Baja and a little bit up into Oregon, and gives people who may have had little or no exposure to native plants just a general understanding of what are these plants. This is a spring picture that Hank shared with me, showing some different wildflowers, some baby blue eyes, some tidy tips, and then in the back, in the middle, is a very showy blue ray ceanothus that's always a strong focal point of the garden in spring because of its very striking blue flowers. And on the fence is a native clematis, which I'll show a little bit later, and you can see the flowers of that. Here's the bush poppy, the dendromecon. Always a very popular plant with home gardeners because its yellow flowers are just so showy and attractive. And it's kind of a nice size upright shrub that doesn't get super huge, but fills in a space fairly quickly. They had some interesting experiences with this one. It was completely undermined by gophers and blown over by the wind and just really battered, and they were able to stake it, and it recovered and has continued to grow. So here you see it paired with the silver bush lupin in the front, and then this bare plant to the side is actually a redbud. And the bush lupin is another local native. I remember really being excited to see these when I was hiking at Edgewood Park, just right alongside the trail near the grassland. And they make such great plants for the garden because they're super showy in the spring and they're very easy care. They grow quite fast as well, and they're great for native bees and other pollinators. And when these are finished flowering, you can just kind of gently trim them down and they'll rejuvenate their flowers again. This is probably about a 5 or 6 foot across wide plant at this point. It's been allowed to grow pretty full size, but it makes a great pairing with the blue, purple of the lupin and the yellow of the dendromecon, and then the red bud behind it with the pink flowers all kind of blooming together in the spring. It's just super, super showy and a great design combination. Here's another picture of the red bud. This one's showing what it looks like when it's fully in bloom in spring. It will get the flowers first, and then later the leaves will come on the branches, and they're little small heart-shaped leaves that will gradually kind of take over as the flowers fall off. And this plant also looks really good in the winter when it's completely bare. It just has a very nice trunk structure, and it's a great plant for attracting birds. It's a really nice plant if you would like to have kind of a large shrub or small tree in your home landscape, because it doesn't get super huge. It will stay a reasonable size and can be gently pruned, but doesn't need a lot of maintenance. And it's also very, very low water. So here we have some California poppies next to a dry creek that was designed in this part of the garden. You can see a white flowering form of the poppy, as well as our orange flowering form. And on the right side of the picture, here is the purple Verbena lilacina. And on the left side is the purple Salvia bee's bliss in flower. And there's also some juncus back here too. And I think that's actually the mimulus right there, the little yellow flowering thing in the back. The dry creek makes kind of a nice focal point through this part of the garden. And another part of this garden shows the sulfur buckwheat, which is a great plant, once again, for a smaller area that a lot of people might have in an urban or suburban sized garden, where you may only have 2 or 3 feet, but you want to create a little zone of natives. So that's this yellow plant right here in the middle of the picture. You could put some of these. I actually have some in my own garden in a space that's about 2.5 feet wide, and that's about the size it eventually grows. It fits perfectly in there. And it's just a nice little tidy, low growing plant that blooms in the spring and then makes kind of russet colored flowers as it finishes blooming in the late summer that can be trimmed off as you wish or left on if you desire to leave them on. Here's a picture of the ground cover sage, the bee's bliss, when it's in full bloom, and you can see how large this plant gets. So it's not a plant for a 2.5 foot space. It's a plant for more of an 8 foot or more space, but is a very fast grower and is terrific for pollinators of all types and has a lovely fragrance, and the flowers are truly irresistible to bees. That's why it's called bee's bliss. But this was probably planted from, I would guess, 1 plant and just the plant spread. It might have been a few, but no more than 1 or a couple tiny little plants to fill this whole area. And in the background here, we see some Verbena lilacina blooming in purple. And this is another kind of low down view of the dry creek and the salvia in the foreground and the verbena in the background. And this tree kind of popping up with the bare twigs is a desert willow that actually doesn't quite have its leaves yet on for the season. Here's a better picture of the Verbena lilacina and what it looks like in the spring. This is a great plant to attract butterflies to your garden and is quite easy to maintain. You basically just let it bloom, leave it to its own devices, and then give it one shearing, usually about once a year. And it's very nicely fragrant as well. And when you get up close to it, you can really appreciate its fragrance. It's a sweet fragrance. So I asked Anne what her favorite plants are in the garden, and here is her reply. It's about a 2.5-minute audio.
I have to admit, my favorite plants, I'd say, are the showy plants. I really enjoy having color in the garden. If I had to choose one plant, it would be manzanitas, I guess, as a family. I really love the beautiful bark. The manzanitas have wonderful structure when they're the taller variety. I love being able to see inside to that trunk and branch, and to see in the springtime when the red bark peels and see that gorgeous green underneath of the new growth. It just is really, really dramatic to me. I really enjoy seeing the hummingbirds go to the flowers. I really love seeing manzanitas no matter what time of year it is. Some of my other ones are canyon sunflower, because it's a bright, cheery plant in a shady part of my garden at home, and it seems to have flowers 3 seasons out of the year easily. Buckwheats I love because they're so full of the native bees. I've had people walk by my garden who say, wow, look at this, beautiful showy flower over here. But what they're not seeing is on the buckwheats, all the activity from the native bees. The buckwheats, I would say, would be probably the number one thing that's what I would call a busy plant in my garden, because of just the buzz and the gorgeous sounds, as well as the activity watching butterflies and bees go to that plant. So I'd say those are some of my favorites. I have more, but it's like trying to name a favorite kid. It's really, really hard to do. And those I would just toss out there as two that would be well worth having in your own garden. And of course, California poppies, so easy. You just, have the gorgeous movement. You have, beautiful color. Everybody loves California poppies. It's just really fantastic.
Yeah, and I'll never forget the first time I did a renovation in my own yard, taking out my lawn and putting in native plants, and included poppies and manzanita and the buckwheat, and same thing. Saw all these bees all of a sudden show up, the native bees, and just the same fascination with just watching them. They had never existed there, and they found the plants. It never ceases to amaze a person. So there's a really fantastic sign here also at the demonstration garden about native bees, helping especially newcomers who might really not even have an understanding of what is a honeybee and what is a native bee. So this is a great addition to the beautiful signage collection, and points out that California has over 1,600 species of native bees. We have this huge variation in size and color, specialty of what types of plants they pollinate. And the sign, of course, points out why we need to eliminate pesticide use in the garden to help us to preserve and protect and foster our native bee species. These pictures I took in fall, and I thought they were really fascinating to me, because not only do they show some of the fall colors that we can see in the garden, with the Verbena lilacina in the front and the mimulus in the middle with its kind of russet tones that it has, and then the yellowish and green of the redbud. This was right before we started finally getting some rain. So this was the driest part of the year. And one thing that was also really beautiful and interesting to see was not only the colors, but the fact that here on the left side, Anne and her crew of maintenance gardeners had taken the cuttings that they had cut from the Verbena lilacina and the salvia and some of the other plants, and they had gently kind of laid them on the ground. So rather than take all those cuttings and pitch them off into a yard waste or a pile or a compost, they were using them right in situ in the area to not only help seeds maybe germinate or be propagated from some of these cuttings, but also to provide cover for the ground, for giving the ground a little bit more insulation, and also provide cover for maybe some wildlife species that might want to come and be in that area. This is the clematis that I showed earlier on the fence, and here's what it looked like in the very, very driest time of the year, along with some pictures that I've taken at other times of the year showing what the flowers of the clematis look like in the spring and then the summer with the seed heads. It's a really fascinating, almost Dr. Seuss-like plant. It's just an interesting character to it and makes a really showy display on the chain link fence where you can see it from both sides. And also on this same fence is a California grape. And this is a very, very fast growing fence cover that will cover a lot of space and get very large. It also has good fall color with leaves that start to turn yellows and reds. And it's just kind of starting to get its fall color in this picture. It will get a lot more dramatic than this. This was taken back in October. I asked Anne what she is most curious about in the garden, and here is her reply.
We are so lucky to live in not only a biodiversity hotspot, but in a place where the challenge is for a plant to survive on such little water. And they have had to develop so many really neat adaptations in order to survive our most severe of Mediterranean climates. We have a Mediterranean climate that gets the least amount of rainfall out of all the Mediterranean climates in the world. And so how do these plants live? I am so curious about their adaptations that have allowed for them to cope from year to year. Last year, we only got 5 inches of rain, and a desert is 10 inches of rain. Yet we're surrounded by all this lush beauty. So I love to learn about all the adaptations that these plants have. I love to, there's so many benefits of gardening with natives, but the intellectual stimulation that you get when you're reading about something this cool makes me totally want to go back to school and learn more science. So I love how these plants have adapted to be such wonderful habitat, such wonderful, gorgeous beauty. It's just really neat to see and to learn what all Mother Nature has done to adapt. And so I think that's probably my favorite thing.
And here's one of the Salvia clevelandiae that I showed earlier. Right as its fullest, having just bloomed, and kind of figuring out, how to make adjustments to this plant to have it be resilient in shape and in habit for spring. So this one actually did get some pruning to bring it kind of down and help it be a little bit more compact. But you can see it's one of its adaptations is to kind of make small leaves, to make gray leaves, and then it's going to become more robust once the rains come. The next area I'd like to talk about is the large plant zone of the California native garden. So in this area, the plants are not irrigated with any type of drip irrigation. They're hand watered as needed to get them established, but they're larger plants that really thrive on neglect and don't need a lot of care and don't need a lot of watering or pruning. And this area was designed by a small team of master gardeners, including Allie Judy, and it was planted in 2016. One of the plants that is a showpiece of this area is the Dr. Hurd manzanita. This one is not yet mature, so it's probably about 4 feet tall right now, but it will get much taller to about 10 or 15 feet when it's fully mature. You can see this particular variety of manzanita has quite large leaves and makes pure white flowers, and it's a fantastic winter blooming manzanita for bees and also hummingbirds. And this year, with our early rain and our kind of mild beginning to winter, some of them started blooming really early, like December, which is earlier than even usual. There's also the mallow. So on the bottom picture here, it's this gray one kind of on the left side of the building. And then on the right is a picture of a close-up of its flower. So it's got such a striking gray foliage, kind of a nice, medium to tall size, and very fuzzy, gentle little leaves, very showy. And another manzanita is the Howard McMinn variety. And this is a great garden plant because it's extremely tidy, looks good all year round, grows to a medium size of about 5 to 8 feet, maybe slightly taller with age, blooms in the winter to late winter with flowers that are white to pinkish. But then all year round, it keeps these green leaves. It's one of the plants that on the hottest, driest, end of summer days still looks good and has attractive bark year round. So highly recommended for its ease of maintenance and its habitat value and its aesthetics. Another interesting plant that not only is showy and is also a pollinator plant, but can be used very creatively in the garden is this white sage, the Salvia apiana. So when I visited in October, the sage had been partially pruned back, the flower stalks, but not entirely. So here are the full flower stalks that have finished blooming. Here's what it looks like when it's white and flowering. And the person who pruned the stalks back a little bit, but not all the way, so that on the bottom left, you can see these hollow stalks were left on to make possible cavities for nesting bees. So not only did they use them in the bee house where they put them in, but they left some actually on the plant to possibly provide a habitat for bees. So I will be extremely curious to see whether any nesting bees are found in the actual sage plant. That would be really, really neat. Another large plant in this area is the toyon, which is locally native. You can see this all over our hillsides when you're walking out there. It blooms white in the late spring to early summer and then produces these striking red berries right in time for the end of the year. This picture was taken in late October, so you can see the berries are on the plant, but they're still kind of a yellowish green color, and that's what they look like until December when they actually turn reddish color. And the plant size can be about 8 to 10 feet tall or even 15 or more, and can be left as kind of a dense shrub if you'd like something that kind of creates some privacy, or you can prune it up to show its trunks if you want more of a small tree. In front of this toyon, which is finished blooming with these russet flower heads, is our local buckwheat again, the Eriogonum fasciculatum, the California buckwheat. And there's some really nice coffee berries in this section of the garden as well. And you can see there's some fun little stepstones made out of tree trunks that are sliced that you can use to walk around and navigate through the coffee berry. And the coffee berries are another great shrub because they get fairly large. They don't need much pruning. They grow to a natural shape kind of on their own. They stay evergreen year round, and then they make berries for the birds that are black and red in color. They're also, like everything here, extremely low water. The St. Catherine's lace, or the Eriogonum giganteum, this one is right at the entrance of the path to this large shrub area. And it's half pruned here. So you can see what it looks like on the left side when the flowers have been pruned off, and on the right side when they're still on the plant. So when they bloom in the summer, they bloom white, and then they fade to these kind of really gorgeous russet tones. And I will show you next a picture of what the area looks like when I came back in December to visit the garden again. The whole entire shrub had been pruned. That's this shrub in the background here. And these are all the spent flower stalks that have just been kind of gently placed all around the plant to provide a mulch using the plant's own materials. So it's a very nice way to not generate a bunch of yard waste, to use what you have on site, and this will just gradually decompose. And so you don't have to bring in extra mulch. The plant gives you mulch to use. There's some great pictures here of wildlife photography that Hank Morales has shared with us. One is this beautiful golden eagle picture. And the garden in general, as Anne previously mentioned, is visited by so much different types of wildlife, all different types of legs, no legs, 2 legs, 4 legs, 8 legs. They're everything from snakes, other reptiles, lizards, to many, many types of bird species, the rabbits, the mammals, and all different types of spiders, of course. And Anne mentioned to me that a family of coyote pups had frequently been napping under the toyon this year, which is pretty exciting to see for the people who came to volunteer, I'm sure. You don't expect to see a coyote in your garden. And that coyote family was able to keep a lot of the mammals under control, the skunks and the possums and the raccoons and the rabbits probably, I'm sure. There's also a blue heron that's been known to visit the garden as well. So lots to see and enjoy. Here's a picture of a butterfly, a fritillary butterfly on one of the non-native verbenas at the garden. One of the easy to attract pollinators to a home garden with plantings of verbena. I've experienced this myself in my own garden with plantings of verbena, seeing this butterfly. And when I no longer had the verbena, I no longer saw the butterfly. So now I'm bringing in verbena so I can now see this butterfly again. I asked Anne what her favorite season of the garden is, and here is her reply.
So no matter what time of year it is, there's always something to see and enjoy in a native garden, especially if you've planted it properly so that there's something of interest that you can look to. So even in the summertime when our plants are mostly either semi-dormant or dormant, you still have summer bloomers such as goldenrod or California fuchsia. You can have those things in the garden for interest then. But I would have to say that springtime is my favorite time of year because that's when you see the wildflowers. That's when the gardens are at their most showy. And that's when I can capture somebody new into enjoying California natives. So that's when the gardens look their best and I can use them to show somebody who has a more traditional idea of what a garden is, somebody who has an East Coast garden idea in their head. That's the time where a person who isn't aware of California native garden, that's the time where they'll stop and they'll say, wow, what is this? And I can say, well, that's a California native. It's a ceanothus or a redbud, or it could be any plant that's looking showy. But springtime is the time to capture that audience. I call it recruiting season because that's the time where I can open the door into the California native plant world and teach them about transitioning and why we want to have a sustainable garden. So I'd have to say springtime.
So I'm going to share a little bit of the South Fence pollinator garden. This is an area that just is down in that lower part of that original map I showed you. You can actually see the parking lot a little bit behind this chain link fence. And this garden is not strictly native, but it's notable to share a little bit about because it's a combination of natives and Mediterranean plants. And it's also a big area of teaching. So field trips of first and second graders who come and visit the whole demonstration garden will come to this area to learn about pollinators and insect anatomy, lizards and habitats for different small and medium-sized wildlife, and also plant life cycles. And this garden was designed by a team led by Pam White, Mildy Weinstein, and Barry Hoffman. There's also some fantastic birdhouses in here and some other interesting signage. So I'm just going to share a few little pictures of this garden. You can see kind of a mixture here of like Salvia greggii, which is a Mediterranean sage, and a lavender, along with some of our native buckwheats. And this is one of our native ceanothus that's in this part of the garden. Once again, a fantastic plant for spring showiness. Also a great pollinator plant, fast growing, doesn't need much pruning, easy care, super low water. Great plant for the garden. And I really like this combination of the St. Catherine's lace and the lavender, because in the fall, you get these great tones of like the lavender color from the flowers on the lavender, and these russet and gray tones from the different foliage of the plants and the St. Catherine's lace. And then in the spring to summer, you'll get the white flowers on the St. Catherine's lace, which are also a good combination with the lavender. So for those who aren't ready to go to a full native plant garden, or maybe have some remnants of things in their garden, they don't want to just rip out and completely take everything out, this patch of demonstration garden also shows that you can mix things and how to successfully do that. There's some great wildlife signage in this garden. This one's a little hard to read because I took it with a lot of glare, but what it's showing is a birdhouse that attract a family of Western bluebirds. And so they were able to get pictures of the eggs, pictures of the baby birds. That's what this little one is here. It's a little baby bird with its beak opening. And of course, here is the picture of the adult bird that Hank Morales took. So just the idea of being able to experience this cycle of life and share it with the first and second graders is pretty neat, and just neat for the adults too. There's some other interesting aspects here. This is a log that was hollowed out, and then inside of it are some little tubes and pine cones, and some mesh is put on it. So it makes a great little habitat log that's also protected, which can serve for a bee home. It can also be a great place where lizards can crawl on top and sun themselves, or on bottom and go and shade themselves and hide. So a lot of interesting things happening here. There's some great examples of solar fountains too. The one here on the bottom left is a very small little fountain, but super effective, because the solar panel feeds a little pump, which just feeds a little burble of water that provides just enough water on these rocks to provide a place for butterflies to come and perch and bees to come and perch, and it's shallow enough for their use. And then here's a fun sign with the opossum, and you can kind of see the skunk in the glare of this sign a little bit, showing some of the more exciting visitors to the garden. This here is a picture of Anne on the left, and then Hank Morales, who took a lot of these beautiful photos. I asked him if he'd get in a picture so we could see who he is, and see his amazing, super amazing camera here as well. So this was taken in December of this past year. I asked Anne what is most rewarding about volunteering, and here is what she replied.
For me, volunteering is just so fun. It really has been a source of not only inspiration with all things garden, but I learned so much from the people I meet, from members of the public, from students, from other volunteers. Volunteering gives you a really wonderful sense of community. You're surrounded by people who are just generally really nice. So I love that about volunteering, and I think that being able to learn and share what I learn is just a really fun thing to do, and I would highly recommend it, and would invite you to come and spend time at Martial Cottle Park or at another one of our demonstration gardens. And I'd love to be able to meet you and share all that we do out there, and have you come and join us anytime you can.
The last area I'd like to talk about is the teaching pavilion area. This is kind of the central area of all the different demonstration gardens with all the native plant gardens kind of on one side. You can see behind this the orchard developing, and then off to the left side is a whole bunch of different vegetable gardens of all different types, and herb gardens and cutting gardens. But this classroom is really a great anchor, and it was extremely expensive. You could tell by the structure just looking at it. But it was supported by a really generous grant from the Open Space Authority, and it was installed and is used readily for all different types of events and talks. And then around it, not only you can see the rainwater cistern here, but there's some little gardens. So this one in front has some hummingbird sage and some berberis, and I'll show a few pictures of what those look like closer up. This is the rainwater capture system, which shows the cistern and shows also some different types of rainwater capture to educate people about how they can include swales from their downspouts to allow water to percolate into their soil naturally, and how they can use rain barrels and rain chains, just to kind of give people that education. This view shows some of the herb gardens and the vegetable gardens when standing inside that pavilion. And then here's some closer up pictures of the hummingbird sage. This is all the hummingbird sage here kind of in the center of this left-hand picture. This is a very, very fragrant plant. It's got this woodsy fragrance that's really nice if you rub it against your fingers. And the flowers, as the name suggests, are complete hummingbird magnets. And it's a very easy care plant that kind of spreads and fills in an area. Maybe if you have it in a wet zone, it might spread a little more than you want. So it's good to pay attention to maybe where you put it. If it's drier, it doesn't tend to spread quite as much. Here, it's kind of bound by a pathway, so it's a perfect little zone for it. And this is the creeping barberry, which also kind of tends to slowly kind of fill in an area. So it's going to kind of ramble in here along with the hummingbird sage. But the creeping barberry is fantastic because it has showy yellow flowers, it has berries that attract birds, but then it has foliage year round that will tend to shift and change colors. So when the new growth comes out, it can be kind of a burgundy color. And then it has different shades of burgundy and green on it. So it's just really showy and attractive and a low growing, easy care plant. And then here's another bee's bliss sage. You can see this one's kind of trying to grow and extend its area out even through the fence. But just a nice gray contrast plant with great lilac lavender flowers in the spring. I was able to stop by and meet several other different volunteers. And this is a picture of them kind of all working and chatting. And, you know, gardeners, when we're standing around, we can't help but get our fingers in the ground a little bit while we're chatting. But I asked them different things about the garden and got some really interesting replies that I wanted to share. One person said that I've just met such neat people volunteering at Martial Cottle. We have this shared interest, but yet at the same time, we're very diverse. And by that, she meant diverse in their thinking, you know, that they might have all these different viewpoints, but this goal brings them together, and the different ways that they see things and work on plants is interesting to share with each other. They mentioned that they just enjoy being physically active outdoors. It just feels good for their body to be outside and be moving around and have that sense of purpose. And then one person said there's a bit of a scientist inside all of us who volunteer, the part that likes to try stuff and isn't afraid to fail. And I think that's a big part of gardening, is that, you know, nothing's going to go right all the time, right? You're going to try things and kind of, well, that certainly didn't work. And it's great to have a demonstration garden, because that's really what it's all about, is learning stuff and figuring out what you can do and what you can't. And sometimes when you fail, it's actually more useful than when you succeed, because you learn from it. I asked Anne what her future goals are for the garden, and I'll play her reply in a minute. This is a picture of her doing a teaching class on a field trip with some students who came to the South Fence Pollinator Garden, and she's sharing with them all the different types of things about that garden. Here's Anne's information about what her future goals are.
So, as these native gardens continue to mature and evolve over time, we really hope to be able to share on a regular basis with students of all ages to learn about sustainable practices with native plants and with water-wise gardening. We hope to share these gardens in a way that provides inspiration. They're wonderful for teaching and introducing to an audience that may have not seen native plants in a way that would make them think that they should garden with them. We hope to inspire those folks to think about converting their traditional landscapes into wildlife habitats and into native gardens, and just allow these gardens to help open the door to gardening with natives and to being sustainable. So we already know that we love native plants. That's why we're sitting here. But not everyone has had the fortunate exposure that we've had. So these gardens will continue to provide inspiration with a little bit of help from us to get new people to garden with natives. So that's really our primary goal.
Okay, that brings to a close the overview of these demonstration gardens and the overview of our profile of a volunteer with Finney. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up to our question and answer moderator, Madeline Morrow, to read questions from the chat for either myself or for Finney, and we will answer them as best we can. I'll go ahead and stop sharing my slides.
Hello, everyone. There's a good number of questions here. I know early on you showed an area with a lot of phacelia in it, and the question was specifically, what species of phacelia was that, or do you have multiples?
We have two types of phacelia. We have the perennial one as well as the annual. So the vast majority of what we have and what was featured in those photos was Phacelia tanacetifolia, which is the lacy leaf phacelia, and it has that really characteristic fiddle-shaped flower that's really beautiful, grows about 16 inches tall or so, and readily reseeds. It can almost become a little invasive if you're not careful. So we do have to keep it under control and watch it from keeping it away from the skirts of other plants.
Thank you. And I know Stephanie mentioned a number of talks that Anne gives. And so another question was, is there a way to access any of those talks? Are any of them recorded and available?
Unfortunately, we have not recorded those talks that I gave in the pavilion. I do have notes that I can share with folks. If they want to reach out to me, they can just write into the Master Gardener main website for Santa Clara County and ask. We have all kinds of presentations that we can access and share with you. So if you send a note to in the chat or something like that, I can take your email and get you some of those talks. If you're specifically interested in my talks, I'm happy to share them with you.
Okay, thank you. And you showed us a really beautiful dripper that had the squash leaf molded receptacle. How does the dripper work on the water feature?
So it's gravity fed. We have that actually hooked into our irrigation system. And within the, there was I don't know if you know this, there was a small bucket kind of at the top. and there's a like a bladder that when that bladder dips down, the water will come from the irrigation system. We have drip irrigation in that section of the garden. It will fill the container, and then just by gravity and a little micro dripper, that water will just continuously drip. So it's wonderful. It's been like zero maintenance. I just clean the little, basin once every week. I'll just come and scrub it out and run a hose over it, and it's super easy. Hank has mentioned here, I don't know if you can turn on your microphone, Hank, as well, or if you can mention, Hank Morales just made a comment. There's videos on our YouTube channel that we have with a lot of the garden topics. So you might check our Master Gardener site for those as well. And I think it was just posted there.
And do you use any compost or other soil augmentation in the gardens?
We don't. One of the nice things about gardening with natives is they don't require a lot of supplemental fertilizer. We have the native clay soil. That in itself is, pros and cons to that, is super good with nutrients. So we don't need to fertilize. We have to watch carefully the amount of water that we give and when we water. But the advantage is it does hold on to water. And so long as you're not overwatering, the plants are pretty happy. So we do not do any additional composting besides laying down our cuttings in around the areas that we're cutting. We don't always do that even. Sometimes, there's too many cuttings and we just, pull them away, because we do want to leave some areas that are very lightly mulched or not mulched so that the bees have places where they can go down into the soil and actually nest.
So there was some discussion about whether California poppies completely die back, and I was wondering, do you cut them back or let them go?
Usually we end up pulling them out because number one, they readily reseed, so we're always getting more. And in fact, if you don't control them, they'll get into pathways, and we are constantly pulling away from pathways. So they will also get into places where you don't want them, like the stream bed, and can smother out other plants. So they have to be controlled. So they're lovely, they're beautiful, they're one of my all-time favorite plants. But after you've pulled an acre of poppies, you're ready for a poppy break.
Yes. And the Master Gardener website is now in the chat. Someone noticed that there are cactus plants growing along the south fence line. Was this planted as a security fence? Was it from the farm, or is it part of the native plantings?
So open tuna, I think our succulent head is on this talk. I saw her name come up, Judy Hecht. Those were donated to us, planted intentionally along there, and there's a bunch of varieties. It's not for security. It's for production of the fruit and to be used for teaching. Judy, if you're still here and have a comment, you're welcome to comment on that specifically. But that, I believe, was donated with perhaps over 100 varieties.
No, can you guys hear me?
Yes, hi Hank.
Hi, everybody. Todd Kennedy donated those tunas to us. And those prickly pear cactus, there are 20 varieties. I think we have 37 plants that we put out. And it's part of our orchard. And as part of a teaching orchard, especially in California and the southwest of the United States, it's a food source for a lot of people. So the fruits are edible, the actual foliage is edible, and is quite nutritious. So once these plants get up to a pretty good size, we can actually have classes and show people what can be done cooking with cactus and so forth. So it's not all squash and pumpkins.
Someone else, thanks. Somebody needs to mute because there's some echo going on. Brenda Porter asks, can you talk about native vines, especially the clematis and pruning techniques? How do you prune
At
them?
our site, we have to really actively train. We had 3 clematis. 2 were nicely trained and 1 was not. The one that was trained at the beginning to go through the fence has done the best. We have a challenge with spider mites getting on it during the dry time of year. If we took a hose to that, every so often, it probably would help matters. But we really don't do too much to it. We just try to make sure that once a year we try to train it so that it stays nicely on the fence. If we don't do that, the park itself, our partner and our landlord will have crews that just will go through and just kind of whack at whatever on the outside of our parcel, which hasn't seemed to hurt anything on the vines. But so the clematis doesn't receive much attention. The same with the grapevines. They're really kind of easy. They will spread. You'll need plenty of room. So if you don't have a lot of room to spread, you'll want to cut them back, and they can take a pretty good cutting back. You can be quite severe with your cutting back on that, and it won't hurt them. They'll come back from that. Stephanie, did you have anything else?
I was going to ask you, does that clematis, does it tend to grow on the ground toward your native garden, or is that a really big issue for you?
It's not been an issue. I mean, I think we, like I said, we just try to kind of watch it and once a year, train it onto the fence, but it's not been a huge issue. It can do that. A lot of them, will want to do that. And we had a vine that I just planted a couple days ago, purposely to let it sprawl on the ground. The one that the pipe dime swallowtail likes. I've got it in a couple of areas, one to kind of go up like a little teepee. And then I planted one along the fence and 2 as ground covers. So we're just brand new, trying to test them out to see. So those would to be determined.
Nice, yeah.
I have pipe vine trained up a pillar, and it does want to try and go on the ground, and so I hack it once a year. At first I thought it wasn't going to grow, and now I do have to get after it because I'm trying to keep it all vertical. I'm going to just answer. Someone asked what the yellow flower is in my box, and this is Madia elegans. In a very wet year. And also we were watering for new plants. Normally it's not this tall. it's growing against my chimney, but it reseeds every year in my meadow. And Madia is a really great summer plant. The flowers shut during the day, but in the heat of summer, that doesn't really bother me because I'm mostly out in the morning and evening. And birds, goldfinches and such, really enjoy the seeds. So it's a great habitat plant, good for butterflies and then good for seed-eating birds. So another question, why are there lavender plants planted along all the fences at the park? I don't know if that's in your garden or other places. And maybe this has to do with your part in the county parks. Or is it the San Jose City Park?
So on the east, I think they're talking about on the east fence line. There's a bunch of lavender plants planted there. And that was done by some of the master gardeners. I'm not sure why the selection per se was selected for lavender. Maybe Hank might know why that was selected, but that was another group that did that. And unfortunately, I don't know the history behind why those came there.
So what it was they had a whole bunch of seedlings and I think some cuttings from some lavender plants. And Mike Kent, our most senior master gardener in the state of California, decided that he wanted to do something to beautify that fence. And so that's what he chose to do. So I know for native plant people, that's kind of blasphemy, but the people that walk up and down there every day seem to like it. So
That it could be worse. And yeah, that was one of the things also that I think it's echoing again, Hank. Thanks. Yeah, that was one of the things also that we pulled out of some of the conversations we had with the master gardeners, is that when you have an organization that's volunteer run, you know, you get people with their particular interests, and that's what's going to get done. You know, you have someone who's motivated to do something, and that's in some ways the privilege of a volunteer as well, right? Is to say, like, this is something I have this material, I have this motivation. So some things get steered by those motivations, and you know, could do a lot worse than lavender, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's not like it's broom. I think I got all the questions. Someone pointed out to me that the funding for this comes from your plant sales and also donations, and that Master Gardeners is a 501c3 organization. Do you pay for water, or does the park provide it for you?
We have to pay for water. We have fundraisers that have been limited since COVID times, but we are also applying for grants. Hank might know a little bit more about where all the funding comes from, but our primary fundraisers in the past before COVID was Spring Garden Market and Fall Garden Market. And Spring Garden Market, we raised thousands of tomatoes and ornamental plants, some herbs. Fall Garden Market was all those cool season crops, the vegetables that you could plant, because we're in a county that you can really plant year round and have vegetables and fruit pretty much year round. That's the goal of a lot of the gardeners here, is to be able to have their own food at their own backyard.
Well,
Madeline, you correctly stated that our primary source of funding is through our fundraising, but as Stephanie pointed out, that we are constantly looking for sources of funding, including Open Space Authority. Hapa has provided 2 grants to us, Valley Water, and other community service organizations have provided either materials, or like our little farm stand came from a donation. So we're constantly looking for sources for that. We do accept cash and other types of donations all the time, so feel free to contribute.
Okay, well, it is, I see now, it's 9 o'clock, and there's one last question, so we'll do that. And did the Friends of Martial Cottle Park plant native plants along the trail on the side of the park? And I believe the answer is yes, but I'm not sure. Who planted that wonderful planting along the outside of the fence?
So along the south side fence area is a wonderful 100% native hedgerow. And that was planted, I want to say it was the Friends of Martial Cottle Park, but I am not 100% sure. It was park associated, and that was outside of the Master Gardener program. CNPS has a Growing Natives Garden Tour, and annually it's held. I would invite everyone to look at that. This native hedgerow, along with the Martial Cottle Park Native Gardens, will be on that tour coming up on April the 3rd. It's the first weekend in April. The South County is April 3rd from 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. And I would invite everybody to participate, go and look at the gngT.org website, and it'll give you more details. But it's a wonderful native hedgerow, and their goal is to help bring pollinators to farming at the park.
Madeline, the answer, just to finish that, the answer to that question is it was a park project, and it was installed, I think, fundraising from Friends of Martial Cottle Park, not Friends of Master Gardeners. And Master Gardeners were not really involved in the planting. All the volunteers and everything are park volunteers. So there's park staff and park citizen. There's a large group of citizen volunteers that help maintain Martial Cottle Park.
Oh, that's great. Sounds like they're getting the message about natives. Before we close, I do want to point, there's some really great, there's information in here, and there's some really nice compliments about the talk. And the 3 dots at the bottom of chat, if you click on them, one of your options is to save the chat. And I'll turn it over to you, Stephanie.
Yeah, great. Well, I just wanted to thank you, Madeline, for the fantastic Q&A organization, and thank Vivian for doing the tech and the YouTube moderation and everything she does to make this series possible. We could not do it without both of you for sure. And Anne, thank you so much for letting me visit the garden twice and interview you. And I can't wait to continue working with you. And Hank, thank you for the amazing pictures and for chiming in with all those great replies tonight. And if I've forgotten anybody to thank, I also thank you.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you, everybody. And
Yeah.
thank you for attending.
Yeah, and great that you could join, Anne, and look forward to seeing you all here for our next lecture series presentation. And thanks everybody for joining tonight in support of native plants. That's who I forgot to thank, the audience.
Right.
We couldn't do it without people who want to show up and learn about natives.
That's right. This talk will be available on our CNPS Santa Clara Valley YouTube channel. So if you have other people who you want to direct them to learn about it, it'll be up there.
Yep, and come visit the garden. Go back to that slide which shows the hours that it's open, and go check it out. It's a great time of year to go see the garden. So we will see you at the next lecture series. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. I'm
Bye.
going to be turning off the session now. So good night, everybody, and thank you.
Right.
Thank you.